Sweden is descending into gangland chaos, becoming one of the most dangerous countries in Europe, and there may be nothing that can stop the descent. Gun violence has been on the rise over the last decade. In 2017, the country saw 36 gun-related deaths, rising to 43 the following year. The next 3 years stayed in the mid-40s before 2022 saw a record increase to 62. The figures for 2023 aren't in yet, but we do know that this year brought Sweden's record month for gun-related deaths, so it's not looking good. The simple fact is that guns and gangs now rule the streets in parts of Sweden, and we're left with a simple question: how did this happen? After all, when you think of Sweden, you probably think of breathtaking scenery, forest, lakes, snowbound wonderlands that stretch as far as the eye can see. It's the home of spectacular ice hotels that are tourism hotspots, the stunning northern lights, which you can sometimes see from various places in the country. What went wrong? On the surface, it would seem like nothing has gone wrong at all. In its annual Happiness Index report, the global economy ranks Sweden as one of the happiest countries in the world. As of 2022, it has an index value of 7.4, almost 2 full points above the 5.4 average, and it stayed pretty consistent in those rankings over the years. Even 2017, which saw Sweden achieve its lowest index value in 7 years, still saw the country achieve a 7.28 rating. It's a happy country. It's also considered one of the best countries for women in the world. In 2022, the global economy said that 46.42% of its parliament members were women. That's near perfect equality between genders, which many more prominent nations struggle to achieve. A 2017 article published in Vogue emphasizes this fact. It highlights that Sweden was ranked as the best country in the world in the Best Countries ranking, a joint effort by the Wharton School and BAV Consulting, easily beating out the United States, which ranked at number 7. The article pointed out that in 2017, Sweden was the best country for women, the best for those who want to live a sustainable lifestyle, and the best to raise children. It's hardly the picture of a nation descending into gang chaos. And the accolades kept coming. In 2023, U.S. News ran a similar study to figure out which country was the best in the world. Sweden came in at number 3, just behind Switzerland and Canada. More importantly, it ranked right at the top for quality of life enjoyed by its citizens and the country's dedication to helping its people achieve a sense of social purpose. The same study also highlighted the country's low cost of living, noting that it's 20.9% lower than the United States, with rents that are over 50% lower. Swedes enjoy access to free healthcare and college too, as well as one of the world's longest life expectancies at 82.8 years. To the outside world, Sweden paints a beautiful picture, but lurking beneath this backdrop of delightful living is a murky underbelly that is growing in influence and causing chaos on the country's streets. For all of Sweden's attractive qualities, there is a segment of the country's population that lives in a parallel world, a world in which they're not one of the happiest countries around. A world in which gun violence and gangland shootings are the norm. The rise of gang violence in Sweden is a strange phenomenon. In November 2023, The Economist reported on a strange Instagram video that highlighted the extent of the problem. It said that October 15th saw the Swedish rapper 50 encourage thousands of his followers to head to his Instagram page and watch what he said would be an important live stream. The many who followed his call to watch found themselves viewing a strange video of a bearded man with a golden AK-47 shouting insults at a rival gang, all while being backed by a trio of rifle-holding heavies in balaclavas. That man was Mustafa Benzema Al-Jabouri, and he staged the video to dispel rumors about his death. Al-Jabouri is an important man in Sweden's gangland culture. He's one of the leading members of the Foxtrot gang, who peddles narcotics and has been one of the catalysts for the increasing violence plaguing Sweden's streets. According to The Economist, this violence resulted in 324 shootings in the first 10 months of 2023, 48 of them resulting in deaths. And it's not just guns that are the problem. The same article points out that explosives are becoming the favored weapons of gang members. A shocking 139 explosions occurred during the same 10-month period, with gang members using dynamite and hand grenades to assault the homes of their enemies. It wasn't the first time that Sweden's rap scene was linked to its gang violence problem. In October 2021, a rising teenage rapper named Einar, who had been Sweden's most streamed artist on Spotify in 2019, was shot several times just outside an apartment building. This wasn't a shooting that occurred in the back streets. It happened in a suburb of Stockholm named Hammarby Sjöstad, with the media quickly linking it to gangs. Einar had faced increasing pressure from Swedish police to testify in a case involving Sweden's Varby gang, that was due to take place just a week after his death. He'd received threats against his life for months prior. In the April before his death, Einar had also been beaten and blackmailed to the tune of $250,000 when the Varby gang used one of his rival rappers, Haval Khalil, to lure him to an apartment. Just a few weeks after that event, they'd used the gang with the same tactic to draw the ill-fated youngster to a studio where they attempted to abduct him. These are individual instances that highlight a bigger problem. Sweden has a major issue in its gun culture. For decades, Sweden was the model for what a country with good gun ownership laws should look like. Everybody in the country has the right to own a weapon as long as they go through the proper application process and are deemed, quote, responsible enough to own a gun. And for decades, that policy worked. Up until 2020, the country had one of Europe's lowest gun violence rates. It was around this point that gun deaths began to creep up in Sweden. It started slowly at first, perhaps leading to Swedish authorities underestimating the problem. But over the last 7 years, the rise of Sweden's gangs has led to an escalation in gun usage to the point where 2023 saw the country's record month for gun-related deaths. On September 27th, 2 people were killed in separate shooting incidents, with another dying the following morning as a result of a bomb blast. The shootings took September's monthly tally of gun-related deaths to 11, with both victims being young. It's unconfirmed whether the 2 people who were shot had anything to do with Sweden's growing gang culture. They may have been innocent citizens, and if they were, that's an even more worrying problem for the country. Its gun violence is extending beyond the criminal element and into regular society. All of this leads us to an obvious question: what's behind the rise of gangs in Sweden? If you listen to some of the country's political leaders, immigration is to blame for the rise in gang-related violence. Before she was ousted from her role as the country's prime minister in September 2022, Magdalena Andersson pointed to failures in the country's immigration problem as the chief cause of the violence. In April 2022, Reuters reported her as saying, "Segregation has been allowed to go so far that we have parallel societies in Sweden." She argued that certain segments of the population live in a completely different reality to the rest of the country, though she stopped short of directly blaming immigrants. Instead, she pointed to right-wing extremism and rising Islamism in the country as major issues. Perhaps that analysis has some validity. After all, her comments came in the wake of riots that left over 100 police officers injured that were incited by a right-wing politician burning a copy of the Quran during his rally. Andersson went on to point out that Sweden has a rising number of immigrants, which is somewhat backed by statistics. In 1993, Sweden had an immigration rate of 1.32 per 1,000 people, with that rate skyrocketing to a peak of 5.697 per 1,000 in 2008. It's been on the decline since then, standing at 2.929 per 1,000 in 2023, but it is clear that many people have entered the country over the past 2 decades. For Andersson, the problem lies not with people entering, but with how well Swedish social services have integrated those people into society. Quote, "Integration has been too poor at the same time as we have had a large immigration," she said. "Society has been too weak. Resources for the police and social services have been too weak." There's certainly a strong argument to make for Sweden's poor immigration policies, setting the stage for its gang issues. Take the 2 gangs already mentioned in this video, Foxtrot and Varby, as examples. Foxtrot is led by a man named Rawa Majid, who some call the Kurdish Fox, and he appears to be operating out of Turkey to keep the gang running. The previously mentioned Mustafa Al-Jiburi is another immigrant, though he's now believed to be based somewhere in Iraq. As for Varby, it was created and formerly led by a Swedish-Moroccan immigrant named Shibab Lamouri. He's in prison now, sentenced to nearly 18 years for his role in gang-related violence that included aggravated assaults, attempted murder, and general destruction within the country. In both cases, we appear to see gang leaders who are taking advantage of Sweden's immigrants, using the lack of belonging that they feel as a result of the country's weak integration to strengthen their gangs. The fact that immigrants have played a role in forming these gangs has led to some in Sweden believing that their issues aren't a, quote, Sweden problem, they're an immigration problem. But perhaps that doesn't tell the full story. While there is certainly a validity to the claim that poorly handled immigration has allowed tensions and unhappiness to fester, there are deeper issues at play. Beneath the facade of Sweden's near-perfect social policies lie hidden problems that are perhaps the chief causes of these tensions. In a November 2023 article, The Guardian highlighted 5 key issues that might lie behind the rise in Sweden's gang violence. The first one we've already covered, gun crime. According to the article, Sweden now has Europe's second highest gun crime death rate, at just under 0.5 deaths for every 100,000 citizens. The good news is that it's still far behind the highest-ranking country, Albania, which has a rate of nearly 2 deaths for every 100,000. but this statistic puts Sweden in company of countries like Moldova, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and it's a massive jump in the rankings from 2010, where Sweden was 14th on the list. You could also argue that Sweden's gun laws have come back to bite it. Though the country restricts gun ownership to those it deems responsible enough to own guns through its application process, that doesn't account for firearms that might be stolen and sold on the black market. Unfortunately, we don't have particularly recent data on gun theft in Sweden. However, there is one study, published in Sage Journal, that examined the rate of theft between 2003 and 2010. It found that 2,231 licensed and modern firearms were stolen during this period, with 45% of those guns being rifles and 37% being shotguns. Even more worrying, the study concluded that almost 100% of those guns were stolen from safes. These weren't cases of careless owners leaving their weapons lying around for others to steal. The thieves knew what they were doing, breaking into homes and overcoming the gun owner's safe to get their hands on the weapon. Perhaps not uncoincidentally, the 2010s was the period in which Sweden started to see a small increase in gun violence that perhaps acted as a prelude to the gang warfare seen in its streets today. But there are other issues at play, and one of those issues is utsatta. That's the Swedish word for vulnerable areas across the country that are at risk of extreme poverty. According to Swedish police, the utsatta make up just 5% of the entire nation, but they are hotspots for the gang-related violence that Sweden faces. Data from the SCB, a Swedish statistics agency, highlights the problem. According to the SCB, the people living in the utsatta areas have more than 30% risk of being in poverty, which is far below the national average of about 15%. They're also less likely to be employed or in some form of education, with about 25% of the people aged 20 to 64 in these areas either being out of work or not in school, compared to 14% in other areas of Sweden. This figure also compares unfavorably with Sweden's national average unemployment rate, which was 7.1% in November 2023. The utsatta regions also have a much higher rate of children leaving school early, 21% compared to 10% elsewhere. There is some positive news, however. According to The Guardian, the percentage of young people who aren't in education or working in these vulnerable areas has declined in the last decade. But the simple fact is that there is an inequality issue at play. That's according to Felipe Estrada Dorner, a Stockholm University professor of criminology, who says in order to slow down the supply of new recruits to gangs, inequality must be reduced. He says that harsher punishments aren't the answer, as they don't overcome the poverty problem. They're more of a band-aid, a way of politicians appearing tough on crime while doing little to actually help the people living in these vulnerable areas. It's in this examination of poverty that we see the immigration issue come back to the fore. Most of the utsatta regions have high proportions of second and third generation immigrants, as well as residents who weren't born in Europe. If Sweden's integration policies are as poor as its former Prime Minister Magdalena Andersson says, then it's not hard to imagine why many of these immigrants would turn to crime. They may not have the support from society that they require, making the prospect of making more money by selling drugs and getting involved in gang violence more attractive. Sure, there are obvious dangers involved, but there's also acceptance into a group through which you can rise, a level of acceptance and camaraderie that many living in the utsatta may feel that they don't have anywhere else in Sweden. Speaking of inequality, Sweden is seeing another issue that's apparent in many other countries. The rich are getting even richer. In 1995, the top earning 10% in the country earned an average of about 380,000 Swedish krona, roughly equivalent to $373,000. By comparison, the next 10% down made about 250,000 krona. There's an obvious gap here, but it's not so large that it could cause resentment among the population. And during the late 1990s, that gap actually came down a little bit. But in the 2000s, there was a clear trend toward the richest in Sweden getting richer, while those on the rungs below stayed somewhat static. As of 2019, the top 10% of the country earn around 1 million krona per year. As for 10% or below, it's seen an increase to about 420,000 krona. But it's clear that the gap is getting bigger. Where it was once around 130,000 krona, it's now around 580,000. And as you go further down the income ladder, the story only gets worse. The bottom 10% are barely earning more now than they did in 1995, as they've hovered around the 80 to 100,000 krona range for that entire time. The income gap is so wide that it's the largest Sweden has seen in over 4 decades. And it's likely a gap that can serve as further fuel for gangs as they try to recruit new members. After all, the messaging is clear. The rich are getting richer and you're stuck in an utsatta. Sweden doesn't care about you, but we do. "We can make you rich. We can give you a better life. Join us, make money, and be something." If that sounds hard to believe, then think about some of the tactics that Swedish gangs use to recruit new members. According to The Economist, chat apps are one of their favorite recruitment tactics. Swedish police say that gang members use these apps to get in touch with school-aged children, providing them with lists of tasks they can carry out and the prices the gang is willing to pay for the successful completion of the job. It's a remarkably simple approach, but it's one that takes advantage of the fact that many of these children will see that they can make quick, perhaps even easy money by working with the gang and that they can't make it elsewhere. And once the students in the gang's thrall, they can keep being pushed. They are encouraged to complete ever more dangerous tasks with higher krona figures attached, all to meet the goals of the gang's leader. Perhaps that's the reason why, as Forbes reports, 80% of the shootings that happen in Sweden occur in the Utsutta. And it may be why the chances of young men aged between 15 and 29 getting shot in Sweden are 10 times higher than the same group in Germany. Gangs are targeting vulnerable youngsters, and they're using high pay for the tasks they need to accomplish to lure them in. That would be difficult to achieve if the youngsters were happy with their lives. But with rising poverty and inequality, Sweden now has areas filled with people who are open to the message that a life of criminality is better than the life they have right now. The Guardian highlights this issue with another statistic. Almost 30% of the suspects in gang-related crimes are aged between 15 and 20. That's a massive increase from 2012, which was 16.9%. And when you throw guns into the mix, the numbers only grow larger. In 2012, people aged 15 to 20 were responsible for 23.6% of gun-related manslaughter and murder. Fast forward to 2022, and the figure was 45.1%, almost half of all gun-related deaths caused by people who are either school-aged or just getting out of school. Interestingly, the trend doesn't gel with general crimes among that age group. Those numbers have stayed somewhat static since 2013 and even decreased in 2020, meaning that Sweden's youth aren't simply becoming more involved in crime, rather it appears that a small subsection of them are being lured in by the gang lifestyle, perhaps influenced by poverty and the inequality they face in the Utsutta regions. Add the tribalism that comes with gang lifestyle, the sense of feeling accepted when you might not feel the same elsewhere, and the reasons for these figures become a little clearer. Still, there is one more issue that we haven't covered that's helped Sweden's gangs to prosper: drugs. A lot of them. The rise in Sweden's gun and gang crimes coincides with a rise in the country's narcotics trade. Between 2013 and 2020, narcotics-related offenses rose from about 96,000 to around 125,000. And though the number has declined slightly in more recent years, 2022 saw about 112,000 offenses, there's a clear link between drugs and guns. During the same 2013 to 2020 period, gun-related deaths nearly doubled. According to Ardavan Korsnud, a criminologist at Lund University, the gangs that are behind the shootings are also behind the rising drug trade. Perhaps the most important conflicts in organized crime in Sweden are about the narcotics trade, he says. It's about who is selling where and what. In other words, a gang member who strays into another gang's territory to sell, or sells something that another gang is known to sell, makes themselves a target. These gangs take their drug trade seriously. It's better to kill the offender and be rid of them than to risk them snatching up a percentage of sales or territory. One study published in the European Journal of Health found the demand for illicit drugs in the country is on the rise. Over a 25-year period, it examined urine samples sent in by occupational health service workers in 1994 and 2019. It found that 1.3% of those samples tested positive for one of 5 drugs: cannabis, cocaine, amphetamines, opiates, or benzodiazepines. In 1994. As of 2019, the rate was 5.6%. More Swedish people are using drugs. When demand is present, it's not surprising gangs will rise to supply the demand. After all, drugs are Foxtrot's main product. Its leader, Rawa Majid, is wanted on a massive drug charge, and police are constantly seizing narcotics that are linked to the gang. In December 2022, customs officers seized 800 kilograms of the gang's drugs, likely a small sample of the volume of narcotics it distributes. The closer you look, the more you see a combination of problems that give rise to Sweden's gangs. Drug use is increasing, which provides massive potential for profits based on a product that only the gangs can provide. These gangs are able to exploit Sweden's most vulnerable youngsters, especially those living in the country's Utsutta regions, by drawing them into the gang lifestyle with the promise of money for selling. These youngsters, many of whom are immigrants, are then in a life where territory and control are everything. They shoot to kill because another gang member selling on their territory means less money in their pockets, and cash is an increasingly valuable commodity in a country that's becoming slowly more unequal. How is Sweden responding to all of this? For a while, the country was somewhat in denial. The whole "it's not a Sweden problem but an immigrant problem" attitude led to little being done. But with gun deaths and gang warfare both rising, Sweden has done what many countries do in these situations. It started leaning more to the right. Toward the end of 2022, Ulf Kristersson became Sweden's prime minister, ending 8 years of left-wing Social Democrat Party leadership. He didn't win the election outright. Instead, he formed a minority government alongside the Sweden Democrats, which is a populist group with hard anti-immigration stance. Together, his coalition party won the election with promises to contain gang violence by giving more power to the police and instituting harsher punishments for gun-related crime. He made his stance clear in the wake of the September bombing attack that killed a 25-year-old woman in her home. "We will hunt the gangs. We will defeat the gangs," he said. "It is an irresponsible immigration policy and a failed integration that has brought us here," was his conclusion. Unlike his predecessor, Kristersson doesn't seem as concerned with fixing the glaring social issues that have combined to create the situation in which gang life seems attractive to so many. Instead, he's going to crack down. More police power, longer prison sentences. Both may serve as deterrents in the short term, but those measures could also lead to fuel the growing sense of inequality within Sweden that appears to have played a huge role in the country's gang crisis. Only the future will tell whether Kristersson's approach works. But for now, we want to hear from you. Do you agree with Kristersson that cracking down with harsher penalties on gangs will solve Sweden's problem? Or do you think he's placing a band-aid over a larger wound formed by social policies that aren't serving the people who are drawn into the gang lifestyle? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. Now go ahead and check out this video, or maybe this one instead.